But the main reason we've got a couple units here are to show you some common, functionality tests, things like that that you can perform to figure out what's really wrong. Is there anything wrong at all? You get a call, I say you, it may not be you, it could be your sales rep, your counterpart, it could be the office, it could be an email. However that's coming in, filtering in, ultimately each day, and we'll get into troubleshooting later in this, but more and more each day, I know Graham, I know Brian, I mean Stephen yourself, I mean Trace, I mean Leo, Bird, everybody in this room at some point has either installed one of these, has either went to troubleshoot one of these, has either taken one out and replaced it with a brand new one. And I want to talk a little bit about these products and common things that go wrong with them that are simple fixes that you can do while you're under that crawl space versus, and I say you, I mean, it could be your crew. We talked about this. I mean, I don't want you guys in your houses daily. You're not service techs. You're production managers. We don't need to have you go out there daily replacing Dehus. That's not the point. The point is, in fact, the opposite. If you're going to look at a troubleshoot, and that's basically what this segment's about, and it involves a dehumidifier because of whatever, cupping hardwoods, or we've got a hygrometer in the house. Hygrometer's reading higher than 65% relative humidity. And ultimately, there's a perceived problem, and very well could be one, is let's go and troubleshoot it and know what we're looking for and a couple common things that happen frequently that can really save you a lot of time. That way you're not lugging this thing out, setting another one in, and wasting time and money. So one of the things, Caleb, I'll kind of look for you about this, or kind of to present rather, or a couple things. We got them plugged in. What to listen for. So you might want to get closer. You might want to kind of really get around here and understand. Two of the biggest problems that we see with the dehumidifiers, specifically the Santa Fe's, is when you go in the crawl space, some of you, again, have a little bit more hands-on experience than others, but at the end of the day, when you're under the crawl and you first crawl in there and you're crawling up to the Dehu and you hear it, oh, it's running, okay? Well, it may be running, it may physically be running, but obviously there's a fan mode, whether it's auto or manual, it could be set on automatic, the fan could be running, and again, if you don't have any knowledge of this, you just think, oh, it's running, quote unquote, it's working. Well, there's obviously more working parts that require it not only to quote unquote run, but to function as it should. So the number one thing, well, I don't know if it's necessarily in order, but the two top things I would see, and feel free to chime in if there's anything you saw, other than the obvious, the filter, just basic stuff. You got a little magnetic strip here on the side. I mean, this guy needs to be changed. I think Santa Fe, they say once a quarter, if I'm not mistaken. I would say about, semi-annually, and we've got a plan in place to do that Chris is part of, but if this bad boy's clogged up, that can cause some issues, but most of the time, most of the ones I look at, unless they've got a lot of age on them, they're pretty clean. That's usually not the issue, and that's not typically what we're about to address. The other thing is when you get down there, it's running, relative humidity may not be the issue, perhaps it is, but you see it's dripping. There's actual water dripping, may be perceived as condensation. 101 is make sure the thing's level. I know that sounds such like an obvious statement, but you'd be surprised at how many of these are installed that are not level. They're tilted backwards, they're tilted frontwards, they're sideways. Maybe they were level at one point, somebody bumped them. But at the end of the day, just keep a little torpedo level with you, and just make sure that bad boy's level. If it's level, everything's good. It seems to be, quote unquote functioning, which again is the point of what we're doing here in a moment. But you see this pan underneath, and you can even look in right here, kind of where this ventilation is, and you can actually see sometimes where that calcification and kind of sediments occurred. And usually where that comes from is this outlet where you've got your PVC P-trap that is either going into a condensate pump or going into another means of discharge. A lot of times that thing's just nasty inside. If you look down inside of where the top air pocket is, that's connected to where that P-trap is, you'll see this. It's almost like, it looks like snot. It's like an oyster. Like, it's just gross. It starts to clog that P-trap up, and that P-trap can't breathe. That air can't get through there. It's like an airlock. You want it to be able to escape but not come back down inside. And when it can't escape, that's what happens is it comes right back in, and it starts to basically create, what could be a problem. And it may be as simple as literally just cleaning that out. I'll let you expand upon that.
Yeah, so I guess first thing I'd say is if if you do walk into a crawl space and they say, oh, I've got water in the crawl space, and you trail it back to the dehumidifier, like you said, it's going to be one or two things, and it can only be one of these two things. It's either going to be it's not level, meaning that somehow it's dripping out of the pan and going backwards, or that drain's just clogged. And that can just be solved as simple as taking a big zip tie and unclogging it, pushing it further down the line. One more thing about the drain though. I know, and I've seen this in Charlotte, I don't know what the outer regions are doing when these are installed, but they have to go to a P-trap. You need to have a P-trap on that system, and the reason for that, and the way it was explained to me, was basically your fan motor on these dehumidifiers, your condensation or your coil is on the front here, and your fan motor's on the back. And so what's happening is it's actually pulling the air across that coil versus pushing the air across the coil. And so when it does that, if that drain line we'll just say it comes out, you put a 90 on it, goes straight down to a condensation pump, you're pulling air from that line there, and it's actually hampering this thing's ability to drain properly. And what that does is it'll start to get this off. It will start to build up that algae right here on the pan, and so what that'll do is that can cause some corrosion on the coil eventually. So that has to go down to a P-trap. The problem with it is P-traps will clog up pretty much once a year. And so with that said, they need to get serviced, and like you said, we're going to, right now Charlotte is kind of doing this. Charlotte's really the first region that's going out and actively servicing these, and we're doing that for a fee. And Chris is the head guy, field guy for that right now. He's leading the charge on that. So if it's dripping water, that's got to be a drainage issue, and so that can be solved pretty easily. The next problem that you're going to run into, we'll take a step back. If it's not the drain line, you go in, okay, your humidity is reading 60%, we'll call it, and drain line's not an issue, it's not leaching water all over the crawl space. The next thing you're going to want to do is do what's called a functions test. And so basically what you're going to want to do is generally, obviously, when you walk in there, you're going to find that this dial here is set at the 5 or 6 o'clock position, and then the fan mode is put onto auto. So what you're going to do then is the first thing you're going to do is make sure it's plugged in, make sure you don't have a GFCI issue. And then you're going to start the functions test by turning the fan to an on setting. And so you can start to hear that thing kick on. So now you know your fan's working. And generally, I mean, I've never seen a fan fail on one of these. I mean, I know it's possible, but it's like your air conditioner. They generally never fail. And so with that said, after the fan, you hear the fan kick on. Now you're going to get the compressor to kick on, and that's obviously just turning this dial until you hear it kick on.
You can physically make it hear that.
Yeah, so the big thing you're doing there is just listening to the different sounds, making sure they're kicking on. So right now, obviously these are brand new dehumidifiers. This one been taken out of the box and was sitting in our shop for a while, so it's got a little bit of dust on it. But these dehus don't have any issues with them. So now you've heard both of those things occur. Now the next thing you're going to do is you're just going to make sure that the refrigeration side of this unit is working properly. And so what you're going to do there is you're just going to let it run for a few minutes until you start to feel this coil get cold. And you'll start to feel or see the condensation. And then when you get to that point, like I said, on this unit, this one's brand new, there's no issue with it. But I can feel the coil get cold. I can see the moisture on my fingers when I touch it. So this is working, but let's just say hypothetically you got the call to come out because their hygrometer was reading 65–70% humidity in the crawl space. So you look at their hygrometer, it's reading that, but it appears that the entire system here is working properly. The only other thing that this could be, as far as what we will address in the, and not Santa Fe, is going to be a thermostat switch. Basically, what happens with these, and I'll take this apart to show you. I'm actually probably should take that one apart. Basically, this line right here goes down into the coil right here, and so as that coil is getting cold and getting wet, they've had problems with these corroding, and so when they corrode, what will happen, the couple things you'll see that'll make you know that it is in fact this switch is, so hypothetically you go in, the Dehu's not running, but it's reading 60% humidity. What's happening is it's turning on when you mess with the dial. If you crank it up a little bit, it'll turn on. And then what will happen is it'll run until it achieves that optimum humidity level, let's just say 40%, and then it'll cut off and it won't turn back on again. And then the other scenario that you might be seeing is if you go into the crawl space, and this is probably the more common one, you go into the crawl space, you come up to the Dehu, you do your functions test, but the compressor's not kicking on. That doesn't necessarily mean that the compressor's bad. And generally, if the compressor's bad, you're going to hear it. It's going to make a screeching noise. So basically, if you go in and you see fans working, compressor's not working, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to pull this thing out, send it to Santa Fe because the compressor's bad. That just means that the switch is bad, and that switch needs to get replaced. So, shut that one off. Now, to get to this switch is where it gets a little bit more in depth. It's not super difficult, but in a tight crawl space, it's not fun.
And we're going to physically, we'll demonstrate that. Just going back to a couple key things, just to kind of recap. First and foremost, you go in there, as Caleb mentioned, you've got kind of a trail. You're tracing that back. It's coming to a dehumidifier. Again, make sure the thing's level. It could be that simple. It could just be out of whack. Again, make sure that if you do have water coming out of that, thing's level as can be. Looks great. Check your P-trap. And again, going back to your P-trap, there's been, and Caleb and I think talked to the same guy. We were in an event, and one of the guys kind of educated us on that because we were unclear, and we even talked to some of the HVAC guys, and they're like, I don't really. They were unclear as well about a Dehu. They knew about HVAC, and this guy, it made perfect sense. But also looking at it from a standpoint of, we're thinking, well, let's just run a PVC pipe out. Let's just run it down into a condensate pump, as he had mentioned before. But you've got to be able to have that P-trap, just like for a sink. Like I said, there's a reason that you want, that air, in some cases, depending on what it is, carbon dioxide to escape, but you don't want it coming back in, especially when, as Caleb mentioned, it's between the coil and the fan. So to reiterate what he stated, we do need to make sure we do have a P-trap. All of your dehumidifiers. That's very crucial.
It'll run, but again, you're going to cause damage to that coil over time as it's not able to drain. It's going to hold the water up against it, and it's just going to corrode. I've pulled some out where you can see just and especially on some of those horizons, it's just all corroded all along the bottom and up because there's no P-trap there, and it's that airlock's not there to prevent the air from pulling up into the coil.
And another irony is these come with a hose, and a metal thread coupling that's got a barb on the end of it, so you can say, well, I'm just going to use that, run into a crawl drain. I really don't want to do it that way because that thing's going to get slimed up, gummed up, and more importantly, there's no P-trap.
My guys use that. They use a clear section of that for the P-trap. So that's the first thing. Anytime a homeowner calls me and says that I think I got an issue with my Dehu, I ask them if they'll go in and physically tell me if they can see the clear liquid in that tube, because otherwise if you do a P-trap out of the regular PVC, you can't see it.
Yeah. Unless you put a clean out valve.
Yeah.
Right.
Try to stick a little, I wish we had one here, but a little vertical clean out valve, that way you can physically look down in it.
Yeah, we do
And that's
that
when you
too.
see that nasty kind of sludge, kind of oyster looking snot. And ultimately, that's, to reiterate Ken's point, that's what can cause that. That's pretty much the only two things you're gonna see. As far as active water on Bylar, on poly and whatnot.
So proper setup is to come out with the adapter into the P-trap into a T.
So, yeah, so you're gonna come out, put a 90 on it going, or actually a T, going into the P-trap, and you'll have your clean out valve above. Now, you gotta make sure you have to put a cap on that clean out, because if not, the P-trap's useless. So there has to be a cap. It doesn't need to be glued on, honestly, don't glue it on, because that also defeats the purpose of the clean out.
So when you're coming out, you're gonna go, so your T's gonna face this way. I can draw it for you, but as soon as you come out, you're gonna put a T.
Yeah.
And that way, that vertical
Just cut a
part's what you're
small-
gonna cap off. And
Small
then the
cut
bottom
one
part's
piece to
what
go in
connects to the
between.
P-trap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
We don't have that.
Can you do that inspection after the P-trap and not have to put a cap on it?
I'm sorry?
If you do your P-trap, like,
Not necessarily, because to clean that out, you need to push it down the line. And so what I do, you can either do it with compressed air, or you can do it with, I generally do it with either a brush or just a big zip tie. And so you're trying to push it further down the line, either into the condensation pump or hopefully onto some sort of something to catch what that sludge is. And you got to put that cap on there. So you're running into, a couple extra things that you're going to need to buy. But again, and you could probably speak into this, Chris, or could you, about the P-trap thing?
Yeah, have we ever considered using like an easy trap?
See, I think that's what you're saying you do.
About to pull this up. That's exactly what that.
And I would say too, that if you're going into a condensate pump, it's just as easy to just tilt that thing a little bit and just unscrew the whole compartment.
Yeah.
And then clean it out.
Yeah, take it out of the homeowner's
Yeah.
house and wash it with a, wash
Exactly.
out water.
And I'll usually leave a little bit of bleach in it. I've got a little thing of, just a spray bottle of bleach that I'll spray some of that down into it too, but, that's gonna wash out pretty quick, but until they figure out how to help us with this sludge problem, because nobody's been able to say why these things get sludge. I don't know if the
Well-
HVAC world
Well,
knows that.
they've got, and Rick actually, I know you kind of hear what Rick's got, and he does. He's got the extra thermostats, he's got these kits that we had Thermistore send over, and Caleb and I actually had some experience with this as well, but it's a little gel cap. And basically what that gel cap does, it's almost like, similar to say a toilet bowl. If you put that on the side of it, every time you flush, it cleans it. So, but again, it's got to be replaced. It pulls out real easily, and you put a new one in. But as that condensation's coming out, what it does, it runs through that gel cap, and what it does, it prevents that kind of sludge from happening. But again, it's still a maintenance item.
Yeah, so I actually, Santa Fe sent us a couple of those. I put one in one homeowner's house, and I actually put one just to try under my house on my dehumidifier. And the problem with them that I have is, there are so many different parts, and trying to put that, it's so much easier just to grab one of those and.
You got to make like 10 cuts.
Yeah, you gotta make 10 cuts, and they sell them in these pre-cut kits, but you're gluing 15 different things together. It's a cool idea, but at the same time, now you're still having to go back to replace that gel cap every time. And whereas if you did this, it's as easy as to just have a brush in your back pocket to just go, pop out.
And we're talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one thing I think, Chris, I haven't talked to you, both Chris's, about this, but I got this directly from Nikki Kruger from Thermistore. She's one of their, kind of lead, individuals with them, but at a conference not too long ago, but she said this is what she uses on all of hers. And it gives you that clear visibility, Trace, to your point, and it comes with this. That way we put the ownership, back on the homeowner to go in there, and just like a builder would do. He's not going to come, repaint your, banister. There's or recaulk your tub. There's certain maintenance that's assumed with your home buying experience. So very similar. We are launching a program. We're not need to get into all the details right at the moment, but at the end of the day, it's something that, in our case in Charlotte, where we are the guinea pig for that, we can go in here and easily do that. But in some of our outer regions, until we reach that point, it'd be a good idea to standardize and use this type, in my opinion, of P-trap, so that if you're going to troubleshoot it, you're going to troubleshoot it you know, before we even go out there, to your point, Mr. Homeowner, Miss Homeowner, is there any way that do you feel comfortable going in your crawl space and taking a look at that? Some people may not. Some people, sure, no problem. We go look, yep, that's what it was. I used a little brush. Everything's good to go.
We'll cover this more with sales guys, obviously, but you guys in production are gonna be the ones doing this kind of troubleshooting. But if you're installing dehumidifiers, you can still sell the service to these. And so these have a warranty, but they do require servicing for that warranty. For us to stand behind the warranty, they do require them paying us to come out and check these once a year, because they could say, yeah, we changed the filter on it, but that is something that we can do wherever you're selling these. We can get, Chris, you can speak into this. If you're installing them, you can service them just like this. You know, it doesn't have to be the full launch of our at-home services division that we're doing, but I mean, it's $200 for an annual inspection for us to come and check their crawl drains, their drain extensions, and their dehumidifiers and sump pumps if they have them. And you can do twice a year for, you know, $395 or whatever it is.
Yeah, so, going off of that, that servicing, basically, you mentioned about the filters, they say like quarterly, but honestly, I talked to Joe with Santa Fe, who is their service manager for the entire country.
Yeah.
He said honestly, just change them once a year. That's fine. And because the reason for it is, what he said. I mean, these filters are like the filters that, I mean, those are like hypoallergenic filters. They're the type that you would put if you have severe allergies that you would put in your house. I mean, they're super heavy duty. Even their cheapest one, which I think is like a MERV 11.
Yeah, it's still like.
It's still ridiculously restrictive in somewhat of a good way, but at the same time, in a crawl space, you're not trying to freshen the air, we'll call it. Well, you know, you're not trying to take those particles out of the air, so it's a crawl space. If you had this in your basement, yeah, sure, you know, why not? Try to pull those allergens out of the air, but he said once a year is going to be fine, because what he's even saying is, I mean, these are just, they're too restrictive as they are. He doesn't personally like them being that restrictive, but so basically your annual service or your biannual, whatever you want to do, all you have to do there is, all I would do and what Chris has been doing is replace the filter, do a basic function test on it, and then clean the drain line out, and then you're done. Or the condensate pump. Now, I didn't bring one with me, but honestly, condensate pumps are easy. You just pop them off, or pop the lid off, take all that crap out of the pan, and then just wipe any of that gunk that's built up on the pump assembly, and then you're done.
It gets kind of scaly, flakes right off. It's real quick, real easy. One thing too, before we move forward to kind of discussing, is it the compressor? You know, because that was one of the common misconceptions myself, you know, several years ago I had. You know, it was just, okay, fan's working, something's wrong, it's the compressor. It's the compressor. When, in fact, to our point today, and while we're doing this, it was the thermostat. You know, in some cases it would be the compressor, but we're getting you to a point where you know, okay, to Caleb's comments earlier, this is not something that I can fix underneath the crawl space in the field. But in most cases you can.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing I did want to mention that's pretty critical is the dial itself. You know, we mentioned kind of that 5 o'clock. That's kind of where you want to be. You want to be right within that range. Obviously, the higher you turn it, the drier it's going to get, the lower you turn it. So you don't want to even mess with that. That's why we tell homeowners, you know, we try to educate them. We'll get into the hygrometer later. That's why ultimately we don't want an individual to be able to control it. Because the human nature, when you don't understand something, it's not your area of expertise, is like, man, it seems really humid, I'm going to turn this up. Well, then they can start to buckle the hardwoods because they drew too much humidity out, you know. So there's definitely, Santa Fe recommends that 5 o'clock range. So if you're going in there and that bad boy's cranked right up, you know, definitely make sure before you leave you get it back down to an acceptable level at 5 o'clock range. So.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, your servicing is easy. As far as troubleshooting it, you know, the way I look at it is that you're going to have, you know, just a few main issues. So you're going to have drainage, which is an issue which we've already discussed. You're going to have your compressor, which is a rare issue. I will say I have seen it a couple times. Generally, this thing starts screeching like a pig, and then you know, okay, we got to pull this thing
Real
out.
quick, not to interrupt, but the
Yeah.
other thing too that I learned from the guys was not only will it start screeching, that's going to be your, obviously your aid is probably
Oh,
you're going
yeah.
to hear it, but discoloration. That sticker that's on there, it gets like a really dark, like
Oh.
brownish.
I don't know if you can see the sticker.
When we take it off, you can see it from that side.
Can you? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we'll get everybody around here in a minute. That way Caleb can demonstrate, because I want each of you to maybe just, if nothing else, just put the thermostat in, take it out, just so you can understand how to get familiar with it. Because Caleb will tell you there's one important thing they mentioned about that thermostat we'll get into about the bend. They say it's very critical. We'll get into that in a moment. But going just real quick on the compressor, once you get up here, we'll point it out to you, but the screeching is obviously one thing. The other thing, that sticker just looks like it's just toast.
Yeah.
So that's a more of a visual aid for you to say, yeah, man, that compressor's something ain't right.
So
From
it's-
the compressor getting hot.
Yeah, so
Oh,
if it starts to turn into a brownish color, then you know, okay, this compressor's been running hot, and that's why that they're having an issue with either humidity staying too high or I guess a number of other things. Generally, it's you notice it when the humidity it can't keep up.
Correct.
Is because that compressor's just running too hot. So back to kind of the few things you can be running into. So drainage is probably the number one thing that at least I run into. It's just drain being clogged up. Second thing is going to be, we'll say fan, which I've never seen it personally. Compressor is going to be your next one, and like we said, there's either it's a loud noise associated with it, or you can visually see that it's been running too hot. And then fourth one is going to be, this switch. And this switch is relatively easy to replace unless you're in a super tight crawl space. And then the last one, which is also very common, probably right around where not as common as the drainage issue, obviously, but where I most see these things fail, even sometimes, especially now, more than these switches. I still see the switches go every so often. However, they did in these newer models, they don't fail as often. But the thing that does fail more frequently is going to be when we do your basics functions test, and so you go through the whole thing, you hear compressor, you hear fan, you start to wait and you start to see if it gets cold. If that coil never gets cold, then you know you have a refrigeration issue, and we can't fix that. That needs to get pulled out and sent to Santa Fe. And it's not so much, sometimes the entire coil, nothing gets cold, but sometimes you only see certain parts of it get cold, like maybe at the bottom or at the top. You'll start to see these streaks of frozen condensation occur up at the top. And so you'll feel that, and obviously that's cold, but in the middle or in other places, it's not cold at all. That also tells you it's a refrigeration issue. We can't do anything with that. Pull it out, send it back to the manufacturer.
There should be equal dissipation between the coil.
Yeah, it should be same temperature pretty much all the way down.
Just be safe. Just make sure you're in there unplugged.
Okay, safety glasses, bud.
Anybody got any welding?
Huh?
Hardhead? What's up?
So the date here, basically you see H18 August, so I think they skipped I because it looks like a one, I and J. So you just take, I don't think they skipped J because I've seen some.
Yeah, I think it's just I.
I've seen some that have J. So they just skipped I. So you just take that letter, associate it to the month, and then
And that's
18.
your year. 18's your year.
The
So
rest
if you
of
got
this isn't important. The 65167, that's not important. Just these three.
Yeah. So if you got like a C14, a C15, it's probably the thermostat.
Yeah.
C16, B16, probably the thermostat.
They had about a 2 to 3 year stretch where they had issues with it.
And we'll put protocol in on this too, but one of the things that we're trying to do is every job sheet is supposed to get marked with the serial number.
Yeah.
If you're putting a DU in, the serial number that goes on the job sheet.
Chris has done a good job revamping the sheet that we had, and I think you shared that with everyone, right? If you don't have it, it's a replacement sheet, it talks, I'll pull that up for you.
I cut the, label this on the side, I just cut that out, and I taped it on my work order. I scan it, they got it in the office.
That's everything. Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait.
Do you want these clear safety glasses?
Hold on. No, I'm gonna use this. Hold on 1 second. So you said the sticker, is that the sticker off this?
No, the sticker on the box. Sticker on the.
Okay.
Just that, because it has the serial number and it's marked SN on the box.
Okay.
See that white one on that?
Yeah.
Right there.
So if we took that, maybe,
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I just scored it with my knife. I don't get it, the full thickness of the cardboard. Just.
But again, that's just one of those disciplines that we forget about it, and then we try to return this, and it doesn't get matched to the job.
My guys, I actually have them cut it off the box, and they can't give me that job sheet without that on it.
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, so there are quite a few screws you're gonna need to take off. All right, so once you have all of those off, this is kind of where it gets a little bit, you want to be careful with this. So as you start to take it off, there is some wires that come in, and y'all might want to gather around here and then look at this.
This one's a little different than the compact, so
Yeah.
you definitely want to make sure you don't pull too hard and start yanking.
Yeah, so if y'all can, and it'd be best for you to get up, y'all to come up and look at right in here, these wires. You just want to make sure that these get disconnected, and they've got a little gasket around it. So you're just going to pull that down and around, and then you're good. Now this lid can come off. And so now you're into the guts of the thing. So here's the switch right here. Yeah, Josh, you might want to get that and move it. So if everybody wants to come up and look at this switch, and we've unplugged this. We can go ahead and plug the other one too. So we've got this switch right here that needs to get replaced. Oh well, not really, but and the way you're going to get to this, there are just 2 screws that hold it in place, and these are going to be Phillips.
The longer, it's kind of long to get in there.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is I would recommend getting, and this is going to be more so for the compact. This one you can get it kind of all right, but just a flexible extension. The compact, it's a little bit awkward how you get in there, so it helps to have the flexible one. So there's just this screw right here, and then there's one where you actually have to go between these wires, or behind these wires through here to get this screw. So I will first, we'll get those screws in a second. There are 2 wires here that need to get disconnected from the actual switch that are at times tough to get off. Just make sure you don't cut your hand on this coil, because I've done that multiple times. Yeah, safety gloves. Okay. All right, so once you've got those wires off, you're just going to pop these 2 screws out. Yeah, make sure you got a magnetic. Yeah. All right. So now that you've got those 2 out, here's your next step. So here's that line that goes down into the coil that I was talking about. and you just literally pull the thing up. So now this is a switch. Obviously the switch is fine. Generally you won't see any sort of, you won't even see the, what do you call it? Corrosion. Yeah, the corrosion.
Is this the part that will look like it's been too hot?
No. Oh, so
Question, that'll be this sticker here.
so here's your compressor, just in case anybody hasn't seen it. So this is your compressor. That sticker right there, you'll start to see that that white sticker is where it'll start to get. It'll have that brownish color because it's just been getting too hot. Exactly, and if it is on fire, you probably want to pull that one out. All right, so we'll go ahead and replace this switch. So here is, yeah, this is where it gets a little bit crucial that this is done the right way. We need to make sure that when we unwound this one and put it down into that coil, it has to be just as long as this one is. So with that said, you're just going to pull. You're going to just straighten it out as much as you can. Just make sure you don't kink it. And you'll just measure using this one where you need to be. And you're just going to give it that 90-degree turn. Now, as you go to put this thing back in,
See that on the coil, we literally stick it right in.
yeah. So that'll just go directly in until you get to where it stops. And then this is where we're going to screw this thing back in. Let me get this Oh yeah, I've done one in a crawl that was, floor joists were here. But it was impossible to get. I don't know how our guys got it in there in the first place. So. Well, I don't know how they got it under all the duct work. I mean, I was on my belly the entire time. It was. Yeah. So. Sorry. All right, so once you get it re-secured back there, you're just going to take this excess wire and kind of, without kinking it, just wind it up and make sure you leave it on this little soft pad thing here so it doesn't rub up against the coil while it's running. These wires that I don't know what the correct term is, but basically it doesn't matter which one you put it into. They're not, what's the word?
Polarized.
Polarized, yeah. Yeah, so then you just slide those back in. All right, and then this thing should run. Should.
Before you put your lid back on and cap back on, that's it.
Yeah. All right, and so once you've gotten the thing back together, then you're just going to go through your basic functions test again.
Real quick, just to reiterate how you even get to the point we're at now, is you go in the crawl, there's not necessarily any water, the drain's fine. Again, humidity could be a little high, whatever the case may be. You're in there, fans running, you can hear the fans running, but you're wondering, okay, how do I know, how do I make sure that I understand, could it be the thermostat? Is, again, as Caleb showed you, basically just doing that functions test, taking your dial. You may have to turn it up temporarily from 5 o'clock to get it to kick on. But if you're turning it and it's not doing anything, nothing's kicking on, you don't hear it, boom, 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 you know something's going on.
Yeah. And so when
That's where you
look
start
at
to do what we're
that-
doing now.
Yeah, so you know the fan's working and you crank it all the way up, compressor doesn't kick on. Then the next thing I would look at is, like you said, I would look at that sticker. If that sticker's brown, then we know, okay, this is compressor, take it out. Or even, it very well might not even be the compressor, but it might be, it still might be this switch, but if that compressor is getting that hot that it's turning that brown, don't even waste your time with it, because it's about to have a compressor failure within the next few months probably of you replacing this switch. So you look at compressor, no obvious signs that it's working. Next thing you do is you start to take this thing apart and get into the switch. You replace the switch. Now here we are. I'm going to go through the function test again. So fan kicking on. So now you know you've fixed your problem and that it's just a switch. Same thing on the compact, you just have to take this entire panel off, if I'm not mistaken, because just taking this back half off isn't going to get you to the switch. I'm pretty sure the switch is further up here, so you literally have to take off pretty much the whole thing. Actually, I say that, they might have changed that. I think they changed that from, yeah. So on your older models, you have to take the whole thing off, but it may be that on these newer ones, you can just take these off.
Again, just remember putting this back in, guys. It's got kind of a little edge here, and just don't forget your little rubber gaskets. And when you put them on, you can see this in here kind of has a contour where it kind of goes up and slides in. Y'all can see that. And that's where those rubber gaskets go up and then slide in. So kind of when you're putting those back on, kind of get these guys out of the way.
Now I'm assuming that even on the Horizons, you did look at that compressor and if the tag is brown.
I would probably say, yeah, the same thing. I mean, the horizons are going to be a little bit different. Generally, if I go out and it's not working, I just say, well, it's not working. Because those things are pieces of crap. So,
yeah. I just told Thomas to toss a bunch of them in Nashville.
yeah, so, I mean, but generally, yeah. So compressor, it's going to be that sort of thing. Generally, what I have seen out of those horizons is more of refrigeration issues. You can see the coil, how corroded it's gotten, and that just basically tells me that corrosion has probably gotten to where it's caused a leak in the refrigeration, and then the refrigeration all leaks out, and you hear the compressor running, you hear the fan running, but you're at 65% humidity. So, and that thing is set to be at 40%. So the same general troubleshooting rules apply for any dehumidifier. However, there's no switch that necessarily will go in and replace. So that's going to be a little bit different.
So,
I think.
Of course, up in the mountain region, it gets really dry.
Yeah.
And I got a crawl space that I've had 3 Horizons in. And I took my handheld humostat in there. 38% is what it was showing up on that. And I couldn't get the compressor to come on any of them.
What was the temperature?
Temperature outside? Probably high 30s.
Okay.
And I figured because it was 38% in there, I thought that most of these only went down to 40 or 45% humidity, so I figured I wasn't going to be able to get it to turn on.
Yeah, I just had an issue with one, and I found out the Horizon and the Santa Fe. The Santa Fe is 49 degrees. If that registers colder than 49 degrees,
Yeah,
it won't run.
I didn't realize that. So, everybody hear
I
that?
heard that. No.
Yeah. You
It's,
said,
it's on their manufacturer
yeah,
website.
they said the compressor
Their
won't.
spec sheet. It says 49 to 95.
Now, that's not typically going to matter that much, right? Or will it?
I don't know. I mean,
I was confused to that.
you wouldn't think so. I mean, especially if you got so crawl, shouldn't it so blazing cold there?
Right. We put a brand new unit in there. all the way back to
It's good to know. I mean, if you're below 49 degrees,
So on their website,
it's not going to kick on. So, I mean, if it's cold in that crawl space, like, I guess if we did, like if you're going to troubleshoot something, even the old hybrid systems, quote unquote, that we used to do, I mean, you still shouldn't be that cold in the crawl.